I want to briefly introduce our first speaker of the morning. If you follow the subjects of gamification in the enterprise, gamification of work, and the future of how people will work, this gentleman has come up in your research. There's no way around it. He has been a thought leader on this subject actually for so many years that the fact that he's also chief scientist at Salesforce, which is obviously one of the major players in the enterprise space, should come as no surprise. And it speaks volumes, I think, overall to both that organization and the gentleman himself at how instrumental and insightful he's been on the subjects of gamification of work. And I'm sure many of you have seen him before. And so I thought there's no better way for us to kick off the second day here at GSummit than to hear from the man himself. And it's my very great pleasure to introduce to you Chief Scientist of Salesforce, JP Rangaswami. Thanks so much, JP.
Thank you, Gabe.
Here you go, buddy.
Thank you. Can you guys all hear me okay? Yeah, all the way to the back? Good. Mahatma Gandhi once said something which I've always treated to be very related to how technology gets adopted. Right? I'm paraphrasing him when I say that he said, first they ignore you, then they mock and ridicule you, then they fight you, and then you win. Okay? Sometimes when you see technology adoption, it feels that way. In the mid-90s, late 90s, when I was trying to make use of what Cunningham had done and getting enterprises to use wikis, the first and biggest objection to wikis was the word. Okay? It could not possibly be serious for you to be implementing something that's called a wiki at work. And it took a long time before the stigma of the word itself got taken out so that people started looking at the value. Right? The why was not answered because people stopped listening. When you started using something like Google, right, the same sort of reaction. It wasn't about reducing search costs or how that would help an organization. How could you use a company called Google? And a little while later, I was trying to get the entire bank that I was working at to use blogs. So, seen that movie, read that book, know how it ends, and it takes a while. And there are probably people who are not in this room because of the word gamification. Okay? We started getting hung up with the emotion of the word and saying, you couldn't possibly have game as anything to do with work. And to gamify something to do with work, which is what I spent a lot of time trying to figure it out, must be, having fun at work is actually not acceptable to some generations. And I don't know which generation I belong to in that, but that is the sort of backdrop against which I've been analyzing how gamification comes into the enterprise. Now, to try and put that into further context, the reason why matters. Right? I was one of those snotty little kids where my father had to learn immense patience because I kept on asking the question, why? The long chain of whys until at some point, because I say so, was the only acceptable answer. And sometimes that fate step is necessary. But if you ask me why I believe in gamification, I start off with saying, well, I'm in the business of business. Okay? I've been lucky enough to be working in large enterprises most of my life, and I've been allowed to be an official maverick. Right? I've been paid to be able to challenge the status quo, to be able to ask why, and to say, why do these things happen this way? Why can't they be different? So when somebody told me that work had a hierarchy, I had to sit down and say, well, why do people have to report to people? You're going to run that by me. I need to understand. And it began to become clear to me that an organization existed because resources, like with the military or whatever else, needed to be organized as you scaled. And the things that you did when you tried to scale as an organization were very simple. Right? Business has never been complicated in that sense. My favorite definition of business is a Peter Drucker definition, and I like quoting him whenever I can. The purpose of business is to create a customer. Okay? If none of you in this room or any of you in this room is completely uninterested in customers, then you'll probably find parts of this talk meaningless. Okay, my apologies. I am fascinated by customers. Right. Then when you actually deal with what a customer is or does or buys, we seem to spend forever as enterprises trying our hardest, and I'm speaking on behalf of enterprises here, trying our hardest to force customers to buy that which they don't want to buy at a price that they don't want to buy it at, okay? Which is a bit crazy. If we spent more time trying to figure out what a customer actually wanted to buy and then provided that as a price that the customer wanted to buy, we are much more likely to gain success, right? There's no judgment to be made. You know, I have 3 children, 26, 20, 14. When I know that they were prepared to pay $5 for a ringtone and not prepared to pay $10 for a CD, right? I knew something different was happening, because I could not bring myself to pay $5 for a ringtone where I was prepared to pay 10 for a CD. Value is is perceived by the buyer. So that's the sort of background I want to do. Peter Drucker also said, people make shoes, not money. Okay? And the idea of that is, if you have something a customer wants and you do it well, you will make money. Money is effectively an end result of your doing something well and not a goal in itself. Open source people don't look for business plans. They look for problems to solve, and if the problems are solved well, then the scaling will take place, out of which you could find alternative ways of making money. Doc Searles calls that the because effect, and I have a lot of sympathy with that view. Right? You know, IBM makes money because of Linux rather than with Linux. Okay? These are perfectly meaningful. Okay, when I look at gamification, therefore, I start with thinking, let me just think of gaming itself before I start wondering about why I want to gamify it. Let me think of something in an enterprise and say, first and foremost, it's very rare that I get involved in anything that looks like an environment gaming unless I have clear goals. So if clarity of goal was something that could be obtained, and I could use tools to be able to create that transparency, then I'm more likely to create an environment where people perform better. And yet, despite this being so simple and so true that my son's dog would understand it, and he doesn't have a dog, right? The truth is, very, very large organizations spend a long time trying their best to articulate what the goals of that organization are at scale. You get Chinese whispers type effects, you get the translation and cultural implications across as you sort of go into distributed environments. You get communications failures, even if you're in the next room, much less the next country. So even though the two words may be very, very simple, actually the ability of an organization to be able to transmit clear goals, regardless of whether they were crowdsourced or individually chosen, is not trivial. It's a very, very big win for an organization if that can be done satisfactorily. The matching of ability to levels is largely understood in organizations. Okay? You would never be able to do that in a systematic world where you cannot play something at level 73 unless you've gone through level 72. You can cheat. You can find ways of outsourcing the reaching of level 72 or the acquisition of the attributes and collateral you need to do that. But fundamentally, there are prerequisite structures in much of our systematized world of engagement. Unfortunately, that is not true in real-life, amorphous, messy, bloody work. So we land up regularly with environments where the matching of an ability to a level isn't done, and as a result, actually comparing someone's performance to anything at all is meaningless. Because if I put my 14-year-old daughter and asked her to teach a class of 16 to 18-year-olds, which my 26-year-old daughter is completely capable of doing, I should expect the outcome by having such a mismatch of ability to the skill required. Feedback as you act is not, just words on a screen somewhere. How am I doing is effectively what almost the first child asks. I've been a father a long time now, and the look on a child's face the first time she knows that the training wheels aren't actually in use in the bike isn't as much, wow, the wheels aren't touching the ground or my dad's taken it off. But Dad, what do you think? Okay? A lot of us live, we are human, we are social, we expect the peer recognition, the environmental support to say, how am I doing? And I don't mean we're going to be crazy about always needing to be affirmed and patted on the back and etc., but it's a natural reaction. Right? Guys called Nitin Noria and Champion, and Lawrence, they wrote, Noria is now the dean, I think, at Harvard Business School, and they wrote about 10, 12 years ago a book called Driven, which said humans have 4 drivers: a drive to bond, a drive to defend, a drive to acquire, and a drive to learn. And where people like Maslow 60 years ago thought that these 4 drivers acted in sequence or hierarchy, actually they acted in parallel. So we were all capable of wanting any or all of those drivers at the same time. But the drive to bond is human, and the need for feedback is human, and we need to understand that. And in every part of work, if you want to get that kind of engagement, the concentration comes from being able to have those clear goals, to know that you've got the skill needed to do the job. Because if you give somebody, if in this country someone passed a law saying the new speed limit, right, is 50 miles per hour, the chances are that that law will succeed. If you say the new speed limit is 15 miles per hour, the chances are it won't, because a perception of whether something is likely or possible will actually mask and anchor it's happening. If you give somebody something impossible to do, it just won't happen first because they don't buy in. So the concentration comes from saying, I understand what I've got to do. I think I can do it. It may stretch me, but I can still do it. And I'm going to have the support of the people around me to do it. That focus, that ability to be completely involved in something, until you see a child playing a game, until you see children even reading something, watching something, you almost forget what that intensity of focus comes from not having the distractions of saying, I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know why I'm doing it for, I don't know what this company is about, I don't know who a customer is, and all the malarkey that goes on in large companies. So all this was nothing to do with gaming or gamification. The term gaming may not have existed when all this was written. The term gamification definitely did not exist. All this was actually written, what you saw for the last 7, 8, 10 minutes, was a guy called Mihai Csikszentmihalyi talking about how to be in the zone in what people call flow, right? How to really get increased, incredible performance out of what you do. As a sportsman, as an artist, as a musician, as a worker, it doesn't matter. It actually had nothing to do with business, right? It's a simple truism. If you want performance to be high, as an individual, as a team, as a group, these rules of saying, can you have clear goals and objectives of what the hell you're doing? Can you make sure there is a match between, at least a reasonable match between the skill required and the skill already had? Can you make sure that feedback loops are accurate? If those things are true, then you're likely to get the focus, the concentration, the single-mindedness that's going to get the outcome. That's really what all this is about. So when people talk about gamification, I couldn't care less about whether they called it gamification or sausage making or egg manufacture, as long as the outcome was a set of decisions that allowed people to embed within what they did an ability to achieve these. That's what was called flow, and I'd recommend, if you haven't read his 1990 work on the subject or the papers that led to it, you please spend time doing that. Engagement matters. Why does it matter? Right? Disengaged people don't respond to anything. There's a level of, trust does not take place. And without trust, you don't get the bonding. Without the bonding, you don't get the sharing. There's a whole lot of things that just break down if you don't actually get engaged in the first place. And it's become more important than it's ever before because we live in a world where everything around us is becoming more interconnected, complex adaptive systems are emerging, change has become a constant, it's become real fast. We understand that we're not in a quantified, predictable risk environment, but in a true environment of uncertainty. And if those things are there, then it's effectively like saying we used to be in a world where we used to cross the Niagara Falls on a tightrope with a safety net, as the chance grew greater and riskier and it became more unpredictable, we still had the same job to do, but there wasn't a safety net. But now people are having to cross that divide, right, on a tightrope without the tightrope. Okay? It has become that much harder. So the support of the people around you, the collective intelligence that comes, the quality of the feedback loops, the importance of having deeply aligned understanding of objectives that are common to enough of the group has never been more important because of the nature of the problems you face. And this is as true as an individual as you work for a corporation, because it reflects on climate change, on how water is going to be dealt with, how we're going to solve for education, how we're going to deal with public deficits. Every one of these things is going to require us to come together in ways where an understanding of why we're doing it, some ability to put, it's like enacting law to do. I mean, I'm not stripping, but, I could not believe that we live in a world that had SOPA and ACTA type madness, because the repetition of people who have no idea whatsoever about the technology that they are legislating for, being forced to legislate, was shocking. Okay? Now, that kind of environment exists everywhere. People are making decisions that they have no understanding of. And the only way we're going to be able to solve that is to be able to get the goals clear, to know that we've got people whose skills are matched to the jobs done, to get that feedback loop going. As adoption comes about, because good engagement allows people to adopt, then what actually happens is usage increases. And we need the usage to increase, because who the hell said we're right? Okay? Anyone who is a scientist is going to say, no, you look at a situation, you come up with a set of hypotheses, and you want to test the hypothesis, but you want to test them unemotionally, objectively. You want to be able to measure the outputs, and you need to be able to refine it and be willing to do that. And you're not going to do that sitting in an ivory tower. And we live in a world where usage metrics are available to us in ways we have never imagined before. Almost everything we do, we've gone from transaction analysis of our past through activity streams of our present into intention signals of our future, right? Always effectively persisted, archived, retrievable, auto-date and timestamped, auto-geolocated, associated with identity, right? This is a researcher's paradise. So anything we want to do to learn about how to improve our performance, right? And it's like if you're a sportsman, you want to shave 3/100ths of a second or something. How are you going to do it? Right? You iterate, you train, you record, you inspect, you get the adequate feedback, and you change. Well, this is true for everything we do. There is no harm. Learning is about, I have not failed, I have found 10,000 ways that do not work. But if you only found one way that did not work and you kept doing that, then you're an idiot. Okay? The point is that, Esther Dyson, one of my favorite mentors, says, always make new mistakes. The joy is in being able to make those new mistakes. When we want to innovate, it's because we are able to see something different. And that difference comes from knowing that we are in that Zen-like state of being completely calm about our environment, knowing we're doing things that we are able to do with the feedback loops, the self-esteem, the peace that comes from saying there is value in what we're doing. And if we're in that, the ability to innovate is at least in part connected to the quality of the feedback loops in order to be able to say, I got this right, I got this wrong. Most innovation does not take place in a light bulb going, a flash of light, and the answers come. There's a hell of a lot of hard work that goes through getting the wrong things out of the way. The almost Saint-Supéry example of saying, when there's nothing left to take away, that's when you've reached the end. Right? Simplicity becomes important. Right? I've got 17 seconds left to go. I'm not here to tell you anything about gamification. I'm actually here to say, if you feel an opportunity to use the tools and the techniques that you hear yesterday and for the rest of today to be able to improve performance as an individual, as a group, as a company, or as a society, in order to better society itself, then you're at the right place. Thank you for your time.
Thanks so much, JP. All right, so we have a few minutes for questions from
sure.
everybody, but I have one for you to start with.
Sure.
So a lot is made of the Silicon Valley belief, and you espouse the belief, and Esther Dyson espouses the belief that mistakes are great.
Yep.
People should make a lot of mistakes.
Yep.
It looks like, though, in practice, most organizations, most environments don't really reward mistakes. Do they need to reward mistakes?
Well, if you call them mistakes rather than learning, then the chances are they won't get rewarded because we've gone back to this stuck in the wrong language. Okay? If I have discovered something that doesn't work, every time I've discovered something that doesn't work, and I document it and I keep track of it. I mean, the best example I can give is, I don't know, I'm probably too old for this, but I do strange things. I play golf, okay? And that probably puts me into some sort of strange minority, but in golf, there's something called the loser putt, okay? And the loser putt is, if you haven't putted at least as far as the hole, you miss the opportunity to learn something about the return putt. But actually, there's something worse than the loser putt, and that's the person who putts, knows it's missing, and walks away before the ball's gone. Because that means you have chosen to not use the learning you could have had by watching what the ball does and where it stops. So we've reached a stage where we're so worried about the mistake, we may ourselves not be capturing the information needed to make learning possible. And I would say that if we're going to get to that point, we're going to have to learn, to unlearn this walk-away syndrome and relearn the ability to say, this is important, that's what's going to make a prevention of recurrence.
So does that suggest then that we need to come up with some kind of do we need to actually incentivize that? Should organizations be saying, awesome, that didn't work out, but I want to keep pushing you forward.
Yeah, and in the open source movement, you could say it already happened, okay? The Eric Raymond spoke of Linus Torvald as saying, Linus's law, given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. And the idea was that in a community, the power of inspection finds things that are weak, exposes them, and corrects them. So people are used to being, but that was rewarded in a peer recognition environment. Here what we're talking about is, what happens if this recognition that you want is your customer?
Right.
You'd like your customer to make the effort to say, by the way, this is a problem, okay? Now, imagine a world where a complaints department actually rewards the complainer, right?
That sounds awesome, by the way. I love to complain.
Yeah,
so
but the idea of saying, this week the best complaint was, okay? So that there's constructive complaining that takes place. Rather than go whinge, you're sort of saying, call in, and we're going to expose your complaint to the whole world, right? What you've actually done in some ways is gamified complaining, because there's a little bit of competition brought in, and it's not sort of kill or be killed testosterone competition. It's just like saying, be smart about complaining. Don't just whinge.
Awesome. Thank you so much, JP. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. Thanks, buddy. Thank you.